Okay, we'll get started, everyone. I assume you can hear me okay? Excellent. So, thank you for coming along to this seminar. This session is talking about the movement away from paper towards digital products, about how you can influence that in your sites, what benefits it will give you, and essentially how you can make that work, essentially. So just a quick introduction for myself. So my name's Daniel Eckermer. I'm the founding director of PoolWaterTS Limited, also the developer of PoolWaterTS. I was previously a sports centre manager. I've been in the leisure industry since 1996, so a little while. Starting basis as a sports assistant and lifeguard, literally working my way up all the way through. I was a sports centre manager up until 2022, when I then came to the Institute of Swimming as programme leader for Pool Plants. The system that I'll finish with at the end, just to give you a quick bit of background, I created off the back of wanting to take my site, my sports centre, to a digital platform so that I could monitor results electronically wherever I was, as and when I needed to, so that I could assist the staff and obviously monitor things as they were in the pool. So that's essentially where we'll be getting to with this. Now I need to say at this point, this is not a sales pitch. What I want you to get out of this is to understand how you can help your sites and the different opportunities you might have to benefit you. Okay? Ultimately, with the systems that I might show later on, it has to suit you rather than you just taking it on for the sake of it. Okay? It has to work for you. Okay? But I'll go into that a little bit later. So throughout my career, I've been hands-on in pool plants. As a manager, I was very hands-on. I used to do the backwashes, I used to do chemical dosing, I used to clean out the dosing lines, everything like that, as well as the staff training. So you can, I've been right from the ground level upwards, essentially. In my role at the moment with PoolWaterTS and also for the Institute of Swimming, I also sit on to the forums for QTAG. So I sit on the training forum as part of my Institute of Swimming role, but also the industry forum as part of my PoolWaterTS role. Okay. So essentially, as a manager, I recognised that there was a need for a digital system to log pool test results, partly to help the staff as well understand what was happening in the pool. Okay, because some of them didn't necessarily have the interest in the pool plant in terms of the chemistry, what was going on, and be able to see and recognise what was actually happening in the pool. So therefore, we sometimes had issues that arose that could have been preventable. I did try other systems out there, but ultimately they didn't meet the needs that I had. I was quite fussy. I wanted it a certain way and to be able to basically accommodate everything that I had within my site. So essentially I created a complex spreadsheet that incorporated those areas that I needed. Okay, so as I said, this is about trying to give you the opportunities of how you can also move your sites forwards. So starting off with paper, so there are positives around paper. You can see the test results on one sheet for a set period of time. So obviously you've got that all in one place. Testers can see the results from previous tests. So you can obviously look up through the days, depending on obviously how you've got it laid out, and be able to potentially recognise where there are some issues. But ultimately, it's a logging process for being able to back yourself up in the future as well. Obviously, there's benefit against the digital side that there's no logins or access restrictions for paper. Obviously, it's just a piece of paper. Ultimately, it's just in a cupboard or on a clipboard. And obviously, if computers go down, there's no data loss. But there are some disadvantages, as I'm sure you all know. So limitations with paper-based records. So in terms of the data collection, it can be difficult to spot errors and mistakes on these sheets. So, partly down to the way they're written. So, some people's writing can be quite messy. You might not be able to read it. They might not even be able to read their own writing. The people doing these tests, they might be lifeguards. They might be duty managers that are time pressured. They might be going into an area that they're not necessarily familiar with, or, they've got other things on their mind that they need to go and achieve. So them doing these tests can be quite rushed at times. You've also got the issue with the manual calculations. That comes down to the time pressures as well, where they might need to work out the combined chlorine, for example. Some people in those pressure situations don't work well with maths, so those can be a bit of a failure for them. They might end up with the wrong calculations, they might have the readings the wrong way around, they might end up with negative figures or just literally totally wrong. So that's obviously one of the downsides with regards to the paper records, but also it's prone to watermarks and tears. So the nature of a pool plant record like this is going to be taken where the pool test is happening. Pool tests involve water. It gets splashed, gets dripped. Those things obviously will affect the consistency on these sheets. And obviously you can see from this example, which I made myself, you've got some watermarks on there. Obviously it kind of bleaches across and you've got some potential issues there in terms of reading it. Now the analysis of trend side. it's difficult to recognise the trends in these numbers for some people. There are people that maybe have eidetic memories or be able to see patterns in numbers, but a lot of people can't. So in terms of recognising where there's dips or increases in pH or in the free chlorine, etc., that's difficult to see on this sort of view. So that's something where those long-term issues that could be prevented early, they're not being spotted. Obviously, there's delayed responses with regards to this. Because it's on paper, there's nothing that's then being sent off to anyone in terms of management or trying to get that help and assistance. So they might be that the next person's not going to know until they take it to an office or to the manager. What if they get interrupted on their route through? What if they get called away for something else? That issue that's then been spotted might not then actually get passed on. That could obviously have quite severe implications. Now, the limited accessibility and sharing, so time-consuming data retrieval. If you've got a claim that comes through, or any reason you need to back up yourself in terms of any issues that might have happened, finding that information, they're likely stored in a storeroom somewhere, in reams of files. Trying to get that out and trying to find the timeframes that you need to then photocopy, send off to lawyers or whoever you might need to, that is an arduous process. Okay, those are some of the main downsides with this as well. And obviously you can't see anything sort of in terms of visually on this, it's all just numbers and writing. But there is another option, spreadsheets and databases. Now these have obviously been around for a long time. These can be really handy in helping you optimize how you understand your water, how you monitor it, how you then track it and so on, okay? With these, you can reduce human errors. So you can put in things such as data validation checks so that you're making sure that staff are putting in readings that are within a certain parameter, that it flags up maybe with a colour, for example, if it's really high. Obviously then tells the staff straight away that there's something wrong. Those data validation checks can be done on desktop spreadsheets as well as the virtual ones, so those can be really handy. It's a lot clearer and easier to read. It's digital writing, so you're not going to have the issues of people's handwriting or obviously watermarks on the paper, etc. So that's obviously something that's quite a big benefit in terms of this. The trend analysis, you can obviously create graphs with regards to this, so you can see patterns over time. You can see where there's blips or dips or how well it trends, to know whether you're staying within parameters such as the PTAG guidance, or even your own site's limitations based on, if you've got CO2, you physically can't get that pH range down, so you maybe have a little bit higher. This then would empower you to then be able to recognise those things in advance and obviously help control your facility. Informed treatment and maintenance strategies. So using this, you can do pivot tables, and as I said, obviously the graphs, but pivot tables maybe so you can then calculate over a period of time how much you're spending on certain chemicals, how much you're using, what influence is that having in your pool as well. Compliance with regulations, simplified reporting. It's easier to access these, easier to share these on an email or on an online folder. So being able to share those with people that you need to, whether it's other managers, area managers, anyone that might be there to help support you as well, consultants perhaps. That's so much easier in this sort of aspect. And improve compliance tracking. So I've always said about the PTAG side of things, but being able to then have the confidence in your own mind that you're actually following what you need to do to keep the pool safe. And with these, depending on what you use, if you use a web-based form for these spreadsheets, then you're generally going to have an automated timestamp. So you know when that member of staff, or yourself or whoever, has submitted that form, okay? And you can protect these so that no one can modify them afterwards, okay? But there is some technical expertise and time that's needed to make sure these work well for you, okay? So, being able to do the formulas or put in those data validations, learning how to do those things. If you do it right, it can work really, really well, okay? But if you don't know how to do it, that's when it takes that time, okay? So to put in a bit of a context, so in terms of the system, I'll show you a little bit of a screenshot later. So I originally created a web-based spreadsheet as a prototype for my system. Okay, so that was based on all the Excel formulas, the conditional formatting, all those different things to then help my staff understand when they've submitted that pool test what it's actually doing and over time how that's trending. Okay, that was a really valuable tool. Okay, if you can get something like that implemented into your sites or with anyone that you deal with, that will help massively. Okay, really will help. Can't say really too much. But the future is here. So there's purpose-built software out there, okay? Spreadsheets are great, but if you don't have the expertise to be able to put the formulas in or anything like that, then that might be where you might want to rely on systems like this. So there's all sorts of platforms out there, and more than are on this screen. So you've got the likes of the Lovibond app, you've got the Paling Test Connect that connects to photometers, you've got ITIS from STA that's been around for quite a while, you've got OpsPal, which is quite a new one since sort of COVID onwards, and then obviously the system on the right, which is my one, which I'll show you some screenshots of in a minute. But all of these are really good in terms of trying to help you manage your pools, okay? Use the resources out there. Some of these are free, some of them aren't. There are some better ones out there as well in terms of the specific mobile apps, okay? It's about what works for you. Like I said at the start, don't just go with something just because it's there. Make sure it works for you and your site, okay? That's ultimately what you need, okay? The likes of the OpsPal system is one that I've been following quite a lot recently, and they're more orientated towards the risk assessment. The auditing is something they're coming out with soon, and the staff training. They can then help with the compliance side of things as well, okay? Where was I going with this? They also have a water testing section on there where you can log your pool test results, but their focus is more about the risk assessment side of things, okay? With my system, as I said, obviously built around the fact of trying to be operational, trying to, as a manager, empowering my staff to understand what's happening in that water, allowing me to monitor what's happening off the back of what they're doing, and obviously knowing ultimately that they're doing those tests and they're doing them right, okay? So, in terms of the key features you should look out for digital software platforms, so as I said earlier, you need to be fussy. It needs to be about you. It's not about the system, it's about you and what you're going to get out of it, ultimately. So, there's some similarities to the likes of the spreadsheets that I mentioned earlier in terms of data logging. So, the timestamp data for when they're submitting the form, which you get with the online spreadsheets, for example, if you're using forms for those, protecting against edits. So, you know, with these sort of platforms, you can restrict who has access to what. Okay, you have different user levels, for example. You might have someone that is on there as a tester, someone that's an operator, manager, and so on. Each of those might have a different access level that allows them to do different things, such as adding new people onto the system, adding specific pool tests, water balance tests, microbiological tests, etc., and being able to add in those different features. Management sign-off is one that's quite key. It's mentioned in the PuTag Code of Practice as well and various other documents about making sure that top-level management has oversight of what is actually happening in the facility. And systems like this can help you monitor that as a manager or anyone that's sort of lower down. Know that you've got confidence in that person that has signed it off, has seen it, and obviously then you've got that audit trail. Okay? With data analysis, for example, visual dashboards are really, really key in this. Obviously, coming from the spreadsheet side as well, you know, both sides of them, you can have so much clarity in terms of what you're seeing with regards to your pool. Being able to see those trends over time, like I said earlier, where there's dips, for example, how they correlate in the flow of your pool over time. Some people say it's just water, but it's not. It's that element that you're trying to obviously facilitate people swimming, making sure it's safe, making sure that you're backed up as well on this basis. Okay. In terms of those sort of visual dashboards, try and find one that suits your needs. What gives you the information that you need? Your KPIs, for example, if you're focusing on those. What are the key indicators that you need? pH, free chlorine, combined chlorine. Something that's obviously more prominent since COVID, the active free chlorine. So, for example, with my system, it'll actually calculate the active free chlorine for you based on pH. Okay, that's something that's quite key to know that your free chlorine is actively working to disinfect that pool, making it safe. Okay. Data export, so being able to export the data from these sort of systems, whether it's a CSV file, plain text, or reports generally, that is something you need to make sure you've got in a system that you're using, so you can utilise that data in other ways that you might want to, or just for storing it. Because ultimately, you might not stay with the digital system long term, or you might change to another one. You need to be able to have that data stored within your own file systems to be able to utilise for a new one, or to back you up if anything goes wrong at any point. Okay. Alerts and notifications is very key, so you need to be able to have the confidence that that any issues on the system that's logged is going to be reported. Not just rely on someone going up to the office and telling someone, because as I said earlier, they may get interrupted. They may get called away for an incident, or customer might talk to them, and then you've got that delay. Being able to have the ability to notify a manager or anyone that's got selected within their profiles that there's been an issue on the pool. Okay, whether it be an immediate notification, such as for a closed threshold breach. So let's say, for example, maybe the free chlorine's gone over 5 parts per million. You'd want to close your pool after that because it might be that there's something wrong with the dosing controller, might be constantly dosing and it's not going to stop. You need to make sure you've got that safety element. So having that reporting to a manager or anyone, engineer, that then will notify them straight away that there's an issue, they need to deal with it, that's key in terms of making sure your pools are safe, and these sort of systems can help you facilitate that. The outer range parameter side of things, obviously covered it slightly, but in terms of being able to know that your pool is controlled in the way that you want it, default to PoolWaterTS guidance, that should be key on all of these sort of systems as a default. Okay. Some systems will also allow you to modify those to suit what you need, such as my system. Like I said with the CO2, some sites are on CO2, they can't get their pH down as low as 7. Okay, so you need to be able to have that flexibility to manage it the way that you need to. But ultimately, having the confidence that the PoolWaterTS guidance is in there as your buffer point. Okay. Data security. The fact that they're online systems, generally these, or obviously on your own computers, generally they should be quite secure, especially the latest technology. Okay, so you should be able to have confidence in that, and it should be in the terms and conditions that a company was given to you if you take on any of these, stating what they're doing to protect that data, what they're going to do with your own data as well, whether they're going to allow you to have it after you finish using them. Okay, but also if they're going to share that data with anyone else. Okay. For my system specifically, I'll make it very clear in the terms and conditions what I'm going to do with that. It is your data ultimately. Okay, you have a right to take that data out at any point, even after a subscription point. Okay, but one thing I have it clear in there is I will utilise that data to make this system better, but also anonymise it to help the industry in terms of PoolWaterTS guidance, for example. Okay. Now that data I make clear is fully anonymised. Then there's no link to your own sites in terms of how I would be utilising that, okay? But you need to be able to have the confidence in whatever system you end up using, okay? I mentioned earlier about the user access controls and the different roles that you might have for someone accessing the system. So I've already mentioned about viewer levels, for example. A viewer might be someone that can only view literally the system. They can't add any results or tests. They can't modify anything. They can't delete anything. Okay, so that in that capacity, it might be a consultant, it might be a health and safety professional within the company that doesn't do tests, but they might need to see things to benefit you, help you out, advise, etc. A tester might be someone that might only have access to the testing element of the system. So for example, with my one here, I don't know if you can see at the back, but you've got a pool test section on here, and you've got backwash and so on. A tester might only have pool test, they might not have the rest. Okay, so being able to have the flexibility like that in the system will help you manage your sites as well. An operator then the next level being someone that would be obviously physically in the plant room doing things in there, maybe doing a backwash, water balance test, etc. Having those different levels to give you the ability to be flexible with how you want to manage your pool. Okay. Now the data input forms is one that's quite key as well. Okay. So when your staff are entering the data onto forms, how are they going to know if something is wrong? Okay. Now I mentioned about the spreadsheets earlier and the web-based systems. Okay. Web forms linked to the spreadsheets. Now when I created my prototype for this system, that was one of the downsides that I had. Those forms were not responsive in letting someone know that something was wrong before they even submitted that form. So that's one of the key drivers for me with this system, that when a member of staff, for example, enters a pH of 7.5 on here, it's then above the threshold for high, okay, so therefore it shows as high. That's even before they've submitted the form, okay? It would then prompt, obviously they've got a visual prompt straight away that something's not quite right. It then would allow them to then do a retest on that same form to then show an audit trail of what they've done to try and check that that result is correct, okay? So that is, then you as a manager or an operator or so on, you'd be able to then have the confidence of looking back at that form, the results of the form, sorry, and being able to see the process they've gone through to check that that result is accurate, okay? It could be that, for example, that result might be an 8.5, but the previous pool test a couple of hours before might have been a 7. It's probably not correct, so then, as I say, it gives the member of staff the opportunity to then verify that result, okay? So my system specifically allows them to set what the primary result is on this form. Okay, so if they've done 2 or 3 other tests as part of this form, they can set another one as the primary result, which will be the one that will then show and be the one that's on the dashboard, the tables, etc. Okay, but there must be that process of them checking and verifying that's correct. Okay, these forms must be clear and easy for you to use. The fact that it's a web form like this, it should be clear. Okay, but it's about how it's structured as well. How does it benefit you? One of the key drivers for me with this system as well is about dynamic nature of the forms and the system itself. So for me, creating this as a manager, I wanted it to encompass everything that I had at my site. So I had 2 filters, 2 pumps, a PAC dosing system, a automatic dosing controller, etc. And those were the areas that I wanted. But I knew that other facilities had more or less. So it had to be able to be representative of those particular sites. Shouldn't just have 2 pumps, 2 filters, etc. It had to be dynamic. So for me, putting in the back-end system with regards to this, being able to select how many filters you've got, how many pumps you've got, what the flow rates are, things like that, that will help benefit you ultimately and not clutter up these forms. Okay? So that's something that's key to look out for with these and how usable they are for you and your staff. Okay? Something that I've put in quite recently with regards to my system is about pool defaults. So which tests you want the staff to be doing on certain pool tests. So for example, if it's the first pool test of the day, you might want them to do dosing controller plus other ones as well, dosing controller checks, chemical dosing tanks, air handling unit, etc. But you might not want it on some others. So being able to have that flexibility of stating what they're going to have on each pool test is something that might be quite key for you as well. Test result status indicators I've mentioned as well. So for me, for example, I've also got the closed threshold breaches here. So you can have those built into this. So obviously it's an instant notification for those staff. And with the notifications onto a manager, for me personally, I've got it set so that with a high or low threshold breach, it will notify after 3 consecutive pool tests submitted. Okay. With a closed threshold breach, it will submit straight away as soon as they submit that form. So you've then got the confidence that that's going to be passed on to a manager straight away. With a high or low, just the basic sort of threshold breaches, it might not be a critical one. It might be 0.1 over that threshold, in which case it's not going to be an urgent. Okay, that's where that 3 consecutive ones come into play. Okay. Now, real-world benefits for a digital logging system. So, test, checks and compliance. So, in terms of the test, improve results accuracy and consistency. This helps your staff understand what's happening with the pool, what's happening when they do their pool test, and ultimately, if they're doing that pool test right in terms of the numbers they're submitting. Okay? So some of these systems, such as my own, will have a maximum minimum that they can submit on a particular field. So if it's, let's say it's pH, it might not allow them to go above 9, for example. If they put in 90, it's not going to allow them to do it, that sort of thing. Enhanced water quality in terms of being able to plan ahead, notice when you've got those dips and flows in terms of those readings, and being able to recognise when something's going a little bit astray, you can then react to it straight off. Okay, and that's very key in terms of those visual dashboards, being able to see that over a period of time. Optimise chemical usage and reduce costs. So, being able to see those trends over time will allow you to understand whether your dosing controller is dosing in the right way that you want it to, whether it's dosing too much. So some dosing controllers, you can adjust them so that they dose more or less on each stroke. Okay, on the dosing pumps, you can adjust it so they dose more or less. Or obviously the frequency of that dosing. And that will help you to understand that as well, because it might be you're dosing far too much and actually you're wasting chemical. Okay? Obviously that will be shown in your free chlorine results, etc., or your pH readings. But what about your PAC? Will you be able to recognise this sort of thing in your PAC if the setting's been adjusted and you didn't realise it, but you're able to log this? That might help you as well in terms of if that tank goes down a lot quicker than normal. And ultimately the enhanced staff awareness. So, as I mentioned a couple of times throughout this so far, about making sure that we're educating the staff on what's happening in this pool. You might not want them to be doing backwashes or the big pipe alterations or things like that. But ultimately, if they have an awareness of what's happening in that water, they'll be able to inform you or try and react to it a lot sooner. Okay? It might not be that they're going to be cleaning out dosing lines or anything, but that recognition, that understanding, will get everyone on board to be able to make that pool safer. The checks with the enhanced equipment monitoring and fault identification. So this one is quite a key one as well in terms of, for example, your filters. When you need to do a backwash, If you've got any issues with filter gauges, for example. So one of the sites that I've had on, they've been on for quite a while now, one of the first things they noticed as soon as they started using the system was their filter pressures were constantly the same. They didn't quite realise why it was to start with, but as soon as I'd had a look at it for them, it just pointed out, that should be fluctuating. There should be a point where they need to backwash based on the pressures. They were just backwashing every couple of days, regardless of the pressures. But those filter pressures weren't changing. Automatically, they've got an issue with their gauges where they're just literally not reading. They're just flat. Okay, that's something they've now changed. They've installed new ones. They can see those pressures dip and rise and be able to know exactly when they need to backwash, rather than just on a set time scale. Improve proactive maintenance. So kind of a bit like the filters that I've just said there. But anything that you record on these systems will help you identify what you need to do long term. Okay, whether your pool is performing as you want it to. Ultimately, that will help you. And minimises operational downtime essentially. So anyone that's got a swim school or any type of facility where you rely on being able to let those people in, if you can plan ahead or you can see those trends and stop them from getting worse, that's key in making sure you're open as long as you can be. And ultimately the compliance. So I mentioned earlier about obviously the compliance in terms of sending it off if you've got a case against you for whatever reason, whether it's justified or not, but being able to back yourself up and knowing that you've met those standards and you can provide that evidence straight off without having to sift through any files or storerooms or anything like that. Being able to just provide that. For example, you might give like I said earlier, in terms of the access role, being able to give them the viewer access. Someone like that, being able to just sift through all the data on their own, that saves you a hell of a lot of time. Okay, and ultimately a demonstrated commitment to safety. So this will allow you to or give your customers more confidence in you. If your levels are consistently good, because you're monitoring them regularly, that will allow them to have more confidence in you as an operator, and essentially, potentially boost business. Okay. Now, real world benefits, I've already mentioned the top one in terms of the filter gauge and filter condition. Other things such as pH bounce, recognising when you've got pH bounce because your alkalinity is too low. Okay, it might be that and some sites don't test their alkalinity as much as they should do, but if they can see those dips and troughs, etc., that's an automatic recognition of obviously the pH bounce side of things. Or it could be the opposite, it could be pH lock. Okay. So these are the sort of things that you could recognise by using these sort of systems, whether it be a spreadsheet or whether it be these digital systems, as long as you have it developed right for you. Okay? Remember, it needs to work right for you, not for the system, for you. Okay? Other things as well, such as obviously the combined chlorine. So this is quite a key one actually, one that I had a big issue with when I was a centre manager. Had an issue with the combined chlorine where it was just constantly going up. No idea why. Nothing was wrong in terms of what we were bringing into the pool as such. Actually ended up being an organic matter issue coming through the air handling unit, which you wouldn't ever expect. So essentially we had a storm, the filters on the air handling unit had given way, and loads of bugs were coming up into the air duct and literally just being chopped up and chucked into the pool. Okay, so these sort of systems will help you recognise those issues as well and be able to identify how you can resolve them potentially. I mentioned a little bit earlier about staff training issues, being able to recognise the staff that maybe aren't doing the pool test correctly. Okay, so you'll be able to identify not just if they're doing it correctly, but also if they're falsifying potentially as well. So my system specifically will let you know if they've tried to backdate the data on the form, for example. It will have a little flag on it, for example. Anything like that will help you make sure that your information is robust and will stand up to scrutiny. I've said before, obviously, make it work for you. It needs to suit you as an operator, okay? Regardless of whether you go with my system or a spreadsheet, or if you even stick with paper, just make sure you're doing it right and it suits what you need to do, okay? But keep your mind open to opportunities. Make sure you've got clear and consistent records. Ensure your staff understand the importance of the testing and the meaning of the results. There's some operators and centres out there that don't actually let their staff be informed about these results, and ultimately that will cost them long term, okay? Empower your staff, not necessarily to modify stuff in response, but to understand what's happening, why it's happening, how to deal with it in terms of how you want them to, whether it be reporting to an engineer, whether it be something else, okay? Empower those staff, because ultimately they might be the people that are stood here in the future, or being the managers within your company. Make sure you monitor and review the results often. Okay, there's no point doing something like this if you're not going to look at it. Okay, those people that just literally